In the early 1970s, the global financial system was in chaos. The United States had abandoned the gold standard, effectively breaking the promise that every dollar could be exchanged for a specific amount of gold. This was known as the Nixon shock, and it left the world questioning the value of the US dollar. At the same time, the world was becoming increasingly dependent on oil. After the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, OPEC placed an oil embargo on countries supporting Israel, causing energy prices to skyrocket. This was a wake-up call for the US government. They needed to find a way to maintain the demand for their currency. The US had a massive problem. If the dollar wasn't backed by gold, why would other countries hold it? The answer lay in the desert of Saudi Arabia. The US needed a partner to ensure that the world would always have a reason to buy and hold US currency. In 1974, US Treasury Secretary William Simon traveled to Riyadh for a series of high-stakes negotiations. The proposal was simple but revolutionary. The United States would provide military aid and equipment to Saudi Arabia, and in exchange, Saudi Arabia would price all its oil exports exclusively in US dollars. This wasn't just a trade agreement, it was a cornerstone of global finance. If every country in the world needed oil to run their factories, power their grids, and fuel their cars, they had to possess US dollars to buy it. It created a permanent, global demand for the greenback. Other OPEC nations eventually followed suit. By the late 70s, the petrodollar was born. It effectively replaced gold as the primary driver of dollar demand. No longer tethered to a physical metal, the dollar was now tethered to the most essential commodity on earth, energy. This created a cycle known as the petrodollar recycling process. Oil exporting nations earned massive amounts of dollars. They then took those dollars and invested them back into US Treasury bonds and financial markets. This kept US interest rates low and allowed the US government to borrow money cheaply. For the US, this provided an immense advantage. Because the world was forced to hold dollars for trade, the US could run consistent budget deficits that would have crippled other nations. The global reliance on the dollar meant the US could print currency with less fear of immediate inflation. However, this system didn't come without friction. Developing nations were hit hardest, as they had to navigate volatile oil prices while simultaneously managing a currency, the dollar, that was controlled by the Federal Reserve, a central bank they had no say in. Critics often argue that this system turned the dollar into a geopolitical tool. Sanctions, for instance, became much more potent. If a country was cut off from the dollar-based financial system, they were effectively locked out of the global oil trade. As we move further into the 21st century, some nations have begun exploring alternatives. Countries like China and Russia have experimented with trading oil in other currencies, like the yuan or the ruble, attempting to bypass the dollar-dominated framework. Despite these challenges, the petrodollar remains a central pillar of the global economy. The sheer depth of the US financial markets and the trust in its institutions keep the system afloat. It is a massive, complex web that connects every gas pump in the world to the financial heart of New York. The key lesson here is that currency value is rarely just about math, it is about utility and necessity. By linking the dollar to energy, the US ensured that as long as the world needed power, it would need the dollar. Understanding this history is essential to grasping why the US dollar remains the world's primary reserve currency today.